Hello and welcome to this special one-off video from Kingston Liberal Synagogue in which I am interviewing two of our members about a really fascinating conference that took place last week, and they were both on the panel, so I thought it would be really great for us all to get together and for them to tell you a little bit about the conference and about their own involvement in it. They probably need no introduction, but I am joined here by our own Rabbi, René Pfertzel. Thank you so much for joining us, Rabbi René. And KLS member Lior Locher as well, who is a recent convert to the Jewish people. And we were really honoured to be able to conduct her admission ceremony into Judaism just a couple of months ago at KLS. And I'm going to start with Lior, actually. So Lior, can you start by just telling people who are watching about this conference and about the overall kind of project that led to this conference that took place last week?
Yes, so the conference is called Rituals Reconstructed, Continuity and Signaling the Future, and it's basically the second act. It was a project a couple of years ago where people basically looked into, in liberal Judaism, how can rituals evolve and be reshaped, and what else might be needed to be more open and welcoming to LGBTQ plus people. And this was basically a second act to just start the conversation again, involve more people, and keep the good spirits flowing, basically. And it was really amazing. It was a mix of academics, of rabbis, of practitioners, of people working for different organizations in the Jewish space, but also in lots of other spaces, and then kind of other sort of more or less random individuals like myself who have a stake in the topic and who also did a bit of personal storytelling to bring it all together. And it was great. It was 8 different panels for the 8 days of Hanukkah, basically, although they were condensed into 3 for calendar reasons. Yeah. And it was a really amazing lineup.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And Rabbi René, can you tell us why you were invited to the conference and what particular panel you were part of?
So we have an association with Rituals Reconstructed through Dr. Margaret Greenfield, Professor Margaret Greenfield. She came to KLS to talk about another of her projects. She came to KLS to talk about the travelers community a couple of years ago, 18 months ago. And we were supposed to host the exhibition that Ritual Reconstructed have organized. And of course, because of a pandemic, we couldn't do that. And we thought that would be a good way to continue with collaboration with them.
Okay, and what was the panel that you?
Oh yeah, yeah. Sorry. Okay, so I was on the panel called Narrative Inclusion and Queering Jewish Practices.
Wow.
So I was with Reverend Jide Macaulay, who came from House of Rainbow, who came to KLS for Pride Shabbat. Yes.
Yeah.
And we were joined by a Muslim representative and by a Buddhist representative, and they both talked about these questions of inclusion and queering practices in their own faith group. And of course, it's very different because there's a lot of oppression in some places, which in our part of the Jewish world, in liberal Judaism, we don't see that. We celebrate difference and diversity, and it's not the case in every religious tradition. So it was interesting to have all of that perspective.
So it wasn't just, although it was a Jewish conference and organised by Jewish organisations, it wasn't purely focused on Judaism. You had representation from Christianity and Islam as well. So really to broaden it out.
Absolutely. It's also organized by Buckinghamshire University,
right.
So they have to open it to the interfaith world. So that's the reason why we were together as a Muslim, a Buddhist, a Christian, and a Jew together. And it was very interesting.
Yeah, it makes it really fascinating. Yeah. Lior, what was your involvement? Why were you invited, and which panel did you sit on?
So the panel I was on identity and during the pandemic, basically. So what was specific about experience we all had in this year that might be relevant. And it all started with me writing a blog about my conversion ceremony, which you both are obviously very familiar with. And because some of that took place virtually, the Beit Din was virtual, the admission ceremony was live, and I know we'll get into the content a little bit later anyways. So I was basically holding the personal storytelling side of things, and I was on a panel with Dalia Fleming from Keshet and with Joe Hyman from JW3. And they were both sharing their experiences about what they observed, how people were relating and connecting during the pandemic with their two organizations, and the issues that might distance as well.
Okay, can you just repeat the last few seconds of what you said? Because I think we just had a little bit of a technical glitch there.
Sorry about that. Yes,
no, it's okay.
They basically shared how they were able to support their members or their kind of constituents virtually as well, and to make sure that people have ways to connect, which is particularly important, I think, for LGBTQ plus people that might not necessarily be in an immediate surrounding that's sort of benevolent and welcoming.
Can you just say a little bit about what Keshet UK is as well?
Yes, so Keshet is basically the organization that looks after or provides connection for Jewish LGBTQ plus people, and yeah, they run a number of different programs and different ways of bringing people together. And very often for people, that's a good way to kind of, because, you know, we all have different identities and they all want to be lived out at the same time and want to be welcome. And that's a good way for people to find other Jews to connect with, but also other LGBTQ plus people to kind of figure out what that point in the Venn diagram looks and feels like, and how to do that together.
Cool, excellent. Okay, thank you. So that's just a bit about what panels you were both on and what your kind of role in the conference was. Let's just delve into a little bit more detail about what each of you actually said as part of your presentation. So Rabbi René, can we start with you? Can you just sort of summarize the content of your really interesting, because I have read it through, your really interesting talk that you did give at the conference last week?
So I started to reflect on what happened in the Western world for the past 40 or 50 years, how the overall modern narrative of the overarching values and the story that works for everybody has actually been challenged by all the people who are voiceless, like minorities, like women, like LGBTQI plus, in this larger modern narrative whereby we actually present one way of understanding the world that works for one particular type of people. Mm-hmm. And women, LGBTQI plus, ethnic minorities were not part of this narrative. So in the 70s, we've seen liberation movements, many types of liberation movements, but I was mainly focused on the feminist movement and on the LGBT movement starting in the 70s, which started to question this overall narrative, and by saying, there are people which actually have different ways of life, and they deserve to be treated equally as the others. And then I talked about the fact that today, these movements has actually grown into a lot of identities, questions all over the world about, I remember when I was young, the last millennium ago, we were talking about LGBT and then the LGBTQI plus. So there's a sense of atomization of identities, which I understand the desire to go further and deeper and to try to understand all the palette of human definitions, but we really need to find what unites us and not what's divises in our society, our world. And then we have to go a step further than just having this kind of identity wars, because they have the competition between memories. I remember back in France we had when we talked about the Shoah, when it became really a large part of the public discourse in the 1990s and early 2000s, when you had, the people who were colonized by the French saying, but what about our suffering? And then we had this kind of competition between narratives, which are understandable, and we also need to listen to that. But I think we need now to go beyond that and try to understand what makes us all part of a human family.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my kind of introduction. And for the queering Jewish practices, I recorded what we said about in my rabbinic conference assembly of a conversation we are having now about gender recognition, because we have more and more people coming to us wanting to be recognized not just in the binary gender mode, but different variations of gender identification and how we can actually answer that. And also the question of vocabulary, language, because Hebrew is, it's a binary language,
Yeah.
so it's feminine and masculine, that's it. So how can we be creative in order to welcome this awakening, I would say, almost awakening to the diversity of genders. And I also reminded that in the Jewish tradition, in the Talmud, we have 6 genders identified by the rabbis. So it's not something that is, new today. It's something that the rabbis already in the past were thinking of. For example, I don't remember exactly the names in Hebrew, but people identifying male and female or non-gender. So there's a lot of discussions about it in androgynous, for example. All these questions that were already debated. So we can actually go back.
Yeah.
And I think what happened between this time and our time is this modern desire to have one unique overarching narrative for all of us, which actually put people in boxes and say you either a man or a woman. And before that, they had a sense of diversity more than we had. And so the other questions we have discussed with the panel was a question of liturgy. So how do we pray in a way that, because again, Hebrew is very, binary and prayers are very male-centered. So how do we pray to a God that we can identify not as in a masculine form, but in the variety, because God has no gender. I mean, that's obvious, but the way we talk to God and about God is very gendered. So how can I actually find a proper language for that? And also, how do we make sure that the worshippers actually feel comfortable when they pray, that we're using the proper language that reflects the diversity of the identities? And these are the questions that we are debating among rabbis today to make sure that that we are inclusive, because that's for LJ, Liberal Judaism, the main word is inclusivity. And we really want to welcome people in all the diversity, because the richness of a community or a movement is that people are so different that actually you can start conversations and discuss and be curious about the others.
So just a few minor points then.
Just a few minor points.
That's absolutely fascinating. I love the idea of, these discussions going back to the Talmud. I think sometimes people who are not necessarily that close to some of these discussions assume that they're things that have come up in the last sort of 20 or 30 years. But actually, going all the way back to the Talmudic era, these concepts and these discussions were taking place then. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure we'll come back to that as well. So thank you, Rabbi René. Lior, same question to you. Can you sort of summarize the talk that you gave, which was, again, as you said, focused kind of on the pandemic itself and your experience during the pandemic?
Yeah, so mine was a lot more personal storytelling about my own experience. And I know I shared a few other things already in other formats, so I think I'll just share two key points. One was my Beit Din, which was fully virtual. That was really nice. It was, because obviously it is a really big milestone and it is a really meaningful experience, and I was super nervous and so on. at the same time, it's also a bit weird because I was dialing in where I'm sitting from my work laptop. I had blocked off a few hours, but, I had to kind of go back to, like my other secular life with 3 clicks, basically. The conversations were really meaningful, and it was just a really beautiful experience. So you could tell everybody tried to make this as, open and warm and real and deep as you possibly can. And it worked. And what was particularly beautiful for me was, I'm tying into what René was saying. So I identify as non-binary. So I wanted the conversation and and so on to reflect that in a way that both honors the tradition and makes, official paperwork work in the way it has to. I also wanted it to work with, with Hebrew grammar and with just kind of to not confuse people any more than they need to be. But also to be truthful enough to who I think I am, which was enough of a journey to begin with. So where we landed was I'm Lior Beit Avraham veSarah, which means from the house of Abraham and Sarah, which I think is both super elegant because it kind of goes around the are you son of, are you daughter of, and so on. Plus it gives kind of, you still get the image of a family, but it's a family with a house, which I think is amazing because that's even more than the family idea, the lineage idea. So I think from the house of sounds super fancy, and I'm definitely not landed gentry by background.
So maybe it's the closest you get, to being landed gentry. Yeah,
exactly.
Because normally when people do join the Jewish people, it would be either daughter of or son of Abraham and Sarah.
Exactly.
That's a convention, isn't it? So bet or bat. And the other great thing about it is it's also linguistically close anyway, isn't it? Bait.
Yeah, it just kind of, it just kind of slides sort of like flow.
Yeah, it's just it's remarkably good.
Yeah, I thought that was super elegant. And also, to have the conversations about that. And, it's not, my goal is not to, upend everything that people have been doing for thousands of years. I do want to fit in, and I also want to fit in as myself. And I think that was a really good way of bringing that together. So so that was the kind of the virtual side of things. And then, of course, one of the next steps is the admission ceremony, which we thankfully managed to kind of squeeze in between ever-changing regulations.
Yes,
actually managed to
quite fortuitous timing, wasn't it?
Yeah, managed to do it live, face-to-face in the synagogue, which was mainly empty. So basically, I'll just give you sort of a very quick run through the entire day, because I think that day epitomizes 2020 like nothing else. So I had to, in the morning, find a face mask that color coordinates with my talit. So I had bought my talit in Jerusalem about
very important.
Obviously not knowing that there was a face mask to color coordinate with. Yeah, so that was that. And then, you stand there and it's this moment where you're joining the Jewish people, you're also joining a community. It's a graduation of sort of a fairly long process. And you do that by looking into a basically empty sanctuary, kind of staring down the eyes of a webcam essentially, and it's all broadcast live, which is nice, but you can't see people. And it's like, I think it was a really interesting reflection of actually what faith is like, because it's there, people out there, there is like this holding aspect, and you can't see it. Really hard. Like that was just really, really hard. And I wanted to give René a big hug. I wanted to hug the scroll, and none of that was possible, and that was just really, really difficult. And then later in the afternoon, given that was literally the day of lockdown 2 announcement in England, I was kind of milling around Kingston. I was doing some emergency shopping like most other people, and then in the evening I got home with like my trolley from Aldi with the emergency stock up to listen to the lockdown 2 announcement, which is obviously just, let's not go there. And then I came home, and then I rewatched on Facebook the stream and the broadcast of the service in the morning, because obviously while I was there, I wasn't playing with my phone in the sanctuary on Shabbat, obviously. So you got to catch up on that later and read all the really, really amazing comments. And, you know, I just sat there crying my eyes out basically because it was just like, it was just really, really nice. And then, you know, the act of essentially taking a screenshot from a Facebook broadcast to then email it to my brother and to my friends, you know, as sort of commemoration of the big day. It was really nice, and it was also really heartbreaking at the same time. So that's
like you say, sort of an epitome of 2020 in many ways.
That's 2020.
You know, special, but also, Okay, and so you spoke about
we're still
that at the conference. So you sort of
yes,
and that was like you say, it's kind of personal storytelling.
Yeah, and we're still trying to sort out the mikveh. Again, things, you know, involving water and other humans is just really not a good 2020 thing to be doing. First appointment obviously got cancelled. We now have one lined up at the moment. I wouldn't bet money on it actually taking place on that day. I think that might be optimistic.
And it's not something you can really do online, a Zoom mikveh.
No, that one.
Just maybe we need to think about that one a bit more. But anyway,
Yeah. So we might if this keeps going, we might just have to do it in the sea and use the big one in summer eventually. But
it will happen. It will happen. Belated.
It will happen. It will happen. You know, I'll be Jewish for a few more decades, so I'm sure we can figure out.
Yes, exactly. There's no escape now, is there?
Exactly.
So going back to last week's conference then. So Rabbi René, what would you say that were the highlights for you personally, and what did you sort of personally get out of the conference?
I didn't attend the whole conference. I couldn't do that, but there was a lot of storytelling, and I've listened to other people's stories, and I found it at the same time very moving and very true, because at some point we need to get rid of ideology and theories. We need to look into the human lives and to see where people are, and because each human being is like an open book, and you can actually connect to a story. And I really liked listening to people's life and what they went through in their lives. I mean, let's face it. When you belong to the LGBTQI plus community, it's a process of first self-acceptance and then maybe defiance as well. And then at some point, you know, what do you do with this life? Do you live hidden? Do you live in the open? Are you an advocate, or are you or do you want to have just a regular life? I wouldn't say a normal life, because I think, as you know, we've learned this past year, normality is normal. It doesn't exist. So I was really, really amazed, you know, by the bravery of some people who actually told us of their struggle, you know, first for themselves to, you know, I belong to this community, and for those who are actually watching at us, it's not a choice. I really want to make this clear. It's not a choice, because if we could choose our life, we probably would go to something simpler. But the only choice we have is to accept who we are, and then to live by our truth, and to be honest with ourselves and with the others. And that, you know, there's nothing wrong in being a human being who struggles along the way, who tries to find a meaningful way of life. And if some people don't like us, you know, I can't use the word I'm thinking now on the broadcast, but you know, that's exactly how I feel now.
But isn't storytelling the best way to help with the understanding? Because you can come to these topics with preconceived ideas, prejudices in some cases, ideologies in other cases, but actually listening to real people talking about their stories and their own narratives is one way that you can actually aid in understanding for those people who are obviously willing to listen, I guess. So
that's something, you know, in my rabbinate, that's probably the thing that I enjoy the most.
Right.
Connecting with people through stories, engaging with people's life stories. Now, it's not being nosy. It's not that. It's just finding, a common humanity and the fact that we share a lot of struggles in life. I mean, we all have the same hopes and uncertainties, and suffering is part of human life. It's equally shared among all of us. Some of them suffer more than others, but it's an experience that you all make. And what I found really fascinating in my rabbinic life is to see how people evolve and emerge. They become who they want to be. And like we're talking about conversion, for example. It's not just saying I'm Jewish and I'm not Christian anymore. It's much more than that. It involves, the individuals very deeply. And when I ask the first question, I have to ask someone, "What do you want to become Jewish?" It's very often, I don't really know, or we can find real reasons, theological reasons, or my grandmother was Jewish, all these things. But now at this point, you as an individual in your own life journey, why do you want to make this choice? Why do you want to bother converting to Judaism? Where you can, of course, we all have different backgrounds, but that really fascinates me. And to see how people actually go along this process, it's a privilege.
Yeah.
I'm privileged to witness that.
Yeah.
I see this as a privilege. Yeah.
And a common theme that's coming across from you, René, is this idea of universalism as well as the particular, I think, as well. So yes, obviously, the identities, LGBTIQ, they're very, very particular, but also looking at everything in terms of what we have in common and ultimately not kind of competing between those as well. So that's something that's come across, I think, very strongly from what you've been saying. Lior, what were your highlights from, what did you personally get out of the conference? What were your highlights?
Hard to say. So I managed to see the whole day that I was a part of, which was a couple of different panels. And for me, there was definitely something about the storytelling. At the same time, what I was particularly fascinated by was to see how thorough, how seriously people take making this work and how thorough people are about making this work in a way that also incorporates tradition. So, for example, Rabbi Mark Solomon explained how, what he was looking at to make the different types of certificates work and what he was working on and so on. So it wasn't just, I sat down and made it up, it was really like, what's the whole process behind it that honors tradition and everything. And for me, I was obviously one of the beneficiaries of that work, but to be able to see what happens behind the curtain and how everybody collaborates and really tries to make that work to then in the end, have a piece of paper that makes sense. That was really, really impressive because it shows that everybody, works together and takes it seriously and wants to make this work for everybody. And on the receiving end, it feels amazing. And it's also great to see that that's going on and to observe some of that kind of as it happens. Yeah. And it felt a lot to me like, basically like meeting aunts and uncles and cousins and relatives I didn't know existed. So it was really like, it felt a bit like a family gathering of people who are all kind of different, but also similar enough and kind of, with common themes enough to make that work. So I was kind of really, I feel like I landed, and obviously, I'm new to everything, obviously, given, I don't have much of a history or a lineage, but it felt like another kind of, okay, I'm landing somewhere and there are people to be landing with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then thinking about the actual title, the name of the conference, and I know it was going back to a project from a few years ago, sort of Ritual Reconstructed. René, as a rabbi, do you see that there's any way that you can kind of take forward anything that came out of the conference in terms of either your own practice practice for members of the community, whether KLS or the wider liberal Judaism community. How do you think, you could build on the work, or we could build on the work of the conference in terms of that?
Yeah, I think it made me very aware of the importance of what we're doing as a movement. I'm not involved at the core of a reflection on liturgy or the Beidin issues around language. I'm not very much involved in that, but it certainly helps me in my dealings with people on an everyday basis. And it's also a confirmation in a way that what I believe is shared by other people and shared by my movement. I have the same feeling as you, Lior, when I see myself as a liberal rabbi, and I'm not sure if I could go somewhere else, because that's really my home. I'm not saying that the others are wrong, it's just the right place for me. And I like the creativity, I like the forward thinking, I like the idea of let's explore things together. So yeah, that would be my take, a kind of confirmation of what I already believed, and also I want to support that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lior, what about you? Now, obviously, you don't have quite the same lineage in terms of rabbinic practice or Judaism as Rabbi René, being slightly newer to the people. But in terms of either your own practice or what you would like to see taken forward from the conference, what were your takeaways?
I think just the fact that you take another look every couple of years and see where things are at now, that in itself, I think, is already brilliant. So this, at least the couple of conversations I managed to catch, focused quite a bit more on intersex and transgender people. My understanding was that was less the case in the previous installment of the conference.
Yeah,
I think that also matches or mirrors other conversations happening in other spaces where there's now more visibility. And I think that's a good start, because it is kind of, we're all kind of figuring things out and making things work together. And I think looking at, if you're serious about keeping rituals reconstructed, like keeping things fresh and evolving them as things evolve, you would have to take a look every now and then and see where things are at and what else people come up with. And I think that's brilliant. And to see what initiatives people have, what ideas people have, how they want to make things work, where they feel like there's support needs that aren't covered yet with, life milestone events, personal development events, that could be celebrated, that just currently don't really show up because there isn't really a language around that. And I think that's great. More things to celebrate, more ways of supporting people. I think that has to be good, right?
Yeah, more opportunities to eat food together. Yeah, that too. Do you guys think that liberal Judaism is, I don't know if I want to use the word pioneering, but it's the only word I can really kind of think of right now. But do you think it's liberal Judaism is pioneering, or sort of certainly leading the way in terms of this inclusivity and in terms of finding a way to reconstruct our rituals to, ensure that we're embracing, everyone of all identities?
I mean, I'm obviously...
It's a loaded question, that.
That's where I landed. But also I can say, I mean, I spent probably about 20 years having a fairly good look around, what was there in terms of, my own spiritual journey, and trying to figure out where there would be a home for that. And liberal Judaism was the first combination of things I really care about, where I'm like, okay, I feel like that makes sense, that has the depth that I was craving, that has a community that, where I can find a place. And it also, like, my goal was never to, drop out of the world and, live in a cave in the mountains and, like that's not me. Like, I like the world and I want to be in it, just kind of slightly differently. And for me, that makes sense. And I do think there is a space there for people that don't necessarily find as much space in other places yet.
Would you agree? I'm sure you would, Rabbi René.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I couldn't say this better than you said, Lior. That's one of the reasons I wanted to be a liberal rabbi more than anything else. I mean, if we are quite a small movement in the British landscape, but we're so diverse. You know, you have people from all walks of life and people who would not go in this direction. But you use the word space. I think one of the strengths of liberal Judaism is that we have the space for people to discuss. We have the space for creativity and thinking about where we want to go next. And the diversity of opinions is just amazing, and I love it. We don't have a pope, you know. We don't have a catechism. We don't have, we have a kind of a guide for rabbis, you know, where what we should do or shouldn't do. But there's no enforcement. You are not kicked off if you disobey the rules. You know that it's everything is part of a conversation. And of course, I would never do anything that would put my movement into disrepute. That's the right word, yes. But I know that if I wanted to do that, you know, I would, you know, it's not good. But yeah.
We don't have a pope. I think that's probably sums things up. I don't need the Twitter quote for this.
Oh, we don't have a chief rabbi. I mean, in a Jewish, yes.
Exactly. So, guys, if anyone is watching and they would like to reach out to one or both of you to ask more questions, because I'm sure there will be people who are fascinated by what you're saying and would like to explore some of those ideas further. Lior, where can people find you?
So people can find me on Twitter. That's my main place of residence. On Twitter, I'm still Christine Locher. And yes, that does reflect the journey a little bit. And at christinelocher.me. That's Locher with an H.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And Rabbi René, a number of places people can find you.
Yeah, I would say the easiest way to reach to me is my email address, rabbi@klsonline.org.
Absolutely. And obviously also through the Kingston Liberal Synagogue social media accounts or the website where we have a contact form as well.
Absolutely.
If people wanted to contact you that way with any questions about anything that they've heard today. Brilliant. So thanks, guys. It's been absolutely fascinating. We could have gone on a lot longer, but I'm sure, like I say, I'm sure there'll be people who'll reach out to you to continue the conversation for themselves. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Take care.
It's a pleasure.
Bye.